Washington, D.C. ends today without a judge's ruling. Eamon Javers at the courthouse or in the Bureau was at the courthouse all day today. Eamon, what do we know? Where do we stand?
Yeah, Brian, the reason I'm back in the Bureau is because the hearing is over now. We saw that all the participants, including the top lawyers, departing the courthouse this afternoon. And what they didn't get was any ruling from the judge on this question of a preliminary injunction or not. What the Lisa Cook team was looking for was a very quick injunction from the judge suggesting that the effort by the Trump administration to fire her needs to come to a stop. They didn't get that today. Not clear whether they'll get that next week, as you see Abby Lowell there, her lawyer, leaving and entering his vehicle. There was a fascinating debate about what it means to fire someone for cause or not for cause. There was also a debate, Brian, about this question of pretext, right? There's been this argument that the president is just using the mortgage issue around Cook as a pretext to fire her. He doesn't really mean it. And the judge said she's uncomfortable with that argument. And you heard from the Department of Justice's attorneys a defense on that, which was basically this. Look, you can't really argue pretext because you can't test it. You know, he said, what are we going to do? We're going to bring the president in, depose him, and ask him if he really meant it or not? I mean, there's no way to really adjudicate for the court whether this explanation for the cause for the firing is a pretext or is the actual reason. And so you have to look at it on the merits. And so that was one issue. And then there was another issue of this question of due process, right? Whether Cook had enough notice in an official capacity and an opportunity to respond to be fair to her in this process. And what the Department of Justice argued was the president put it out on social media. It was out there for the whole world to see. And then 5 days later, she was fired. So therefore, she had plenty of time.
Boy. So we got to follow up on what is probably the biggest news story in the financial world involving President Trump firing the Biden-appointed Fed governor, Miss Lisa Cook, for alleged mortgage fraud. Now, this woman is refusing to step down, right? She's refusing to leave her office even after the president fired her for alleged mortgage fraud, and she's taken her case to court, right? And I'm not sure if she's going to get the outcome that she's looking for. She certainly didn't get the outcome that she was looking for when she went to court today, because she wanted the judge to swoop in very quickly and to say that this firing is not legal and that President Trump can't do this, but the judge didn't do that. Now, maybe, just maybe, the judge didn't do that because who knows? President Trump may actually have cause to fire this woman, right? I know that's a very, very, very strange concept to the liberal media, to Democrats, that President Trump has the ability as president of the United States to fire people who technically work for the president of the United States. They work for the executive branch, right? Administrations under the executive branch. Yeah, I know this is a very strange concept, but nonetheless, this judge has not made a decision, and probably one of the reasons why is because there are more allegations coming out against this woman. I want to play this clip from CNN featuring their legal analyst, Elie Honig, who is going to go off script and basically explain to the CNN panel why this judge might actually rule against this woman, and how these allegations against her are not unserious, right? These are not petty allegations. This woman has a pattern of behavior that would suggest that she is participating in criminal mortgage fraud. Take a look.
Legal analyst Elie Honig. He's got a new book, When You Come at the King, Inside DOJ's Pursuit of the President from Nixon to Trump. You can pre-order it now. Elie, congrats on the book.
Thanks for the plug.
Thank you for being here. Can you weigh in on what Caitlin was just laying out there for us?
So, two things appear to be true at the same time. One, it seems quite clear that Donald Trump and Bill Pulte, who's the head of this housing finance agency, have targeted Lisa Cook. They want to remove her from the Fed because they don't like what the Fed is doing on interest rates. That seems quite clear from the public statements of Donald Trump and Bill Pulte. It also is true that there is some suspicious activity here that's really problematic by Lisa Cook. Let me just sort of try to bottom line it. There's 3 properties, okay? Within a 2-week stretch, she gets a mortgage on a place in Michigan and says that's her principal residence. 2 weeks later, she gets a mortgage on a place in Atlanta, in Georgia, and says that's her primary residence. And now there's a third place in Cambridge that she said was her secondary residence, but she's actually renting it out. Now, why would someone do all this? Because you get better interest rates, because you get better tax benefits. That can be worth tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Thus far, and I find this really notable, in the briefs that have been submitted by Lisa Cook's lawyers, she was the plaintiff here. She filed the opening brief. No explanation of what she did, how this happened. There's some reference to maybe it's a clerical error. Today in court, Abby Lowell, very good lawyer, again, no explanation of how this happened. And the claim that this might be clerical error or just a mistake, that's not going to fly, because Lisa Cook is one of the most established, accomplished financial and economic experts in this country. And this is not just like any old person. Look, when you do a mortgage, there's all sorts of paperwork flying and terms, and maybe you can get confused or lost. I don't know if you're going to buy that from Lisa Cook. But the bottom line question, as Caitlin just said, is who has to show what here? I think that the allegations on their face could be enough for a judge to say, look, I'm going to defer to the president on cause.
Yeah, that is devastating news for Lisa Cook. That is devastating news for BS Now. That is devastating news for black liberals. That's devastating news for CNN. Devastating news all around for these people who were on television, right, talking about how, this firing is so unjust. They're just going after this woman because Trump is going after this political opponent and he just wants the Fed to lower interest rates, so he's weaponizing the government against him to get what he wants. He's a dictator. But I thought nobody was above the law, right? I thought that nobody was above the law. Now, again, lo and behold, what we have here is the same pattern that we had with Letitia James and Adam Shifty Schiff, okay? This is not a one-off thing. It seems to me that mortgage fraud is quite common amongst these DC swamp creatures, right? These people who have to move from one side of the country to the other side of the country, and then when they do so, they purchase homes, and then they cheat the system, okay? In some cases, again, they cheat the government, they cheat taxpayers by lying on their mortgage applications about whether the home is a primary or a secondary home, as if they don't know the definition of primary and secondary. And if they don't know the definition, I'm not sure why they're working for the government, right? If they can't properly identify whether their home is a primary or a secondary home, again, why are they working for the government? In this woman's case, she listed a third home as a secondary home, but it was rented out, right? It's actually an investment property, which again is a pattern, right? We're talking about a pattern here of listing properties in ways that help her secure lower interest rates, right? That probably would save her hundreds of thousands of dollars, okay, over the long run. Now, do you guys think that a woman who has a pattern of behavior of, at the very minimum, being reckless enough to wrongly list or to wrongly classify her home when taking out mortgages, right? She's done this at least twice now, right? At least twice she's done this. Do you think that somebody like her should be in charge of interest rates, right, of the economy, if her attention to detail is that bad, right? If she's making these type of mistakes, again, mistakes that, just happen to save her hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? But again, in the worst case scenario, this is a woman who lies on her mortgage applications in order to get a lower interest rate. Do you think that a person who would lie for a lower interest rate should be in charge of setting interest rates, right? I mean, does that make sense? Because she's either extremely reckless, not smart enough as an economic official to properly read her mortgage documents, okay, and to mark and list her homes correctly, which again would suggest that she's incompetent, that she's in over her skis when it comes to doing this job. Either she's that dumb, right, that incompetent, or again, she's a liar, right? She's a cheater, right? She cheats the system. Again, should somebody that's either incompetent or that cheats the system, should they be in a job like that? Should they have a role like that? Probably not, right? Probably not. But again, the mainstream liberal media, they're focused on why and how this happened. Well, it's happening just because Trump wants to have lower interest rates. None of that matters because that's impossible to prove at this point. At this point, what really matters is whether or not this woman actually did this, right? Did she do it or did she not do it? Like, is she guilty or not? And at this point in time, her team has not provided any explanation for why this keeps happening, right? This disturbing pattern of behavior outside of clerical error, right? Which, as you guys just heard, the CNN's chief legal analyst says, I don't know if that one's going to slide, right? I'm not sure if that's going to slide in court, considering the position that she's in, right? She's one of the highest level economic officials in the country, and she made clerical errors on her mortgage application. Like, come on, right? Seriously, right? Seriously, yeah. It ain't looking good for her. So, without further ado, let's react to Fox Business's coverage of what's going on with this Fed governor.
All right, folks, all eyes have been trained on Lower Manhattan this morning. That's where U.S. District Court heard a lawsuit from Fed Governor Lisa Cook. This, of course, filed against President Trump to prevent her removal from office. Now, the judge given Lisa Cook's lawyer until Tuesday to file a response to the government's opposition. And she also wants to hear the next steps from both parties then at that time. Now, observers believe this case will likely end up in the Supreme Court due to, let's face it, a sharp rise in activist judges in recent years. The Federal Reserve, though, folks, is part of the organizational chart of the executive branch. And so in terms of purview and oversight, listen, the president nominates Fed governors, so many things the president should be able to terminate their employment as well. Of course, all of that centers around and focuses on the term for clause with respect to presidential authority. Now, we kind of know what it means in general termination for cause, but not necessarily applied here. My next guest, in the meantime, filed an emergency amicus brief on behalf of President Trump, Azoria founder, CEO James Fishback, and he joins us now. James, so exactly what is this amicus brief? What is it about, and what's the goal?
Well, good afternoon, Charles. The goal is very simple: to restate from the perspective of an institutional investment firm like Azoria that President Trump doesn't just have the legal right to remove Lisa Cook for cause. Of course, she committed fraud. But the most important thing was to address these allegations from Cook and her filing that not being able to remove her would actually protect the financial markets. And that's preposterous. Think about this for a second, Charles. The Federal Reserve governors like Lisa Cook have to go out and stop mortgage fraud. They have to protect our financial institutions. They have to conduct regulatory and stress tests at small and large banks across the country. The same person who's entrusted with guarding against fraud is now credibly accused of fraud. That would torch every last bit of credibility the Federal Reserve has left. And so if the Federal Reserve is going to be entrusted with protecting our banks and our financial system, you cannot have someone named Lisa Cook, that little deceitful miscreant, being credibly accused of financial fraud in that position.
Yeah, I think this dude makes a pretty solid point, right? Like, these people are running on national television, talk about the independence of the Fed.
Donald Trump cannot tank our economy by undermining the independence of the Fed. I'd like to see him do it, but I'm still waiting.
It's interesting, Senator. You know, the last few days, the Journal op-ed page, both on the Intel stake and on this. Here's a good line from this morning. Has Trump considered what a politically malleable Fed might do when the progressive left takes charge under another president? Mike asks you about what Dems are saying. Are Democrats thinking about ways in which to harness the power that the president's trying to leverage?
No. I have not heard anyone speak about that. I haven't heard anybody raise that idea. But let me tell you what I do think is going on here. You really have to ask yourself, why is Donald Trump spending so much energy in trying to corral the Fed? And keep in mind, I get it. I've been after Jerome Powell for a very long time to lower interest rates. Jerome Powell said last month that he would have lowered interest rates back in February, except for the chaos that Donald Trump was creating around tariffs.
Yeah. So I hope you guys picked up on that, right? I hope you guys picked up on Elizabeth Warren out of one side of her mouth complaining about Trump attacking, quote unquote, Fed independence. But out of the other side of her mouth, literally in like the next sentence, she says, well, when I was pressuring Jerome Powell to lower interest rates. Wait, hold on. Pocahontas, make it make sense. Make it make sense. It's okay for you as a sitting senator to pressure the Fed chair into lowering rates. So Fed independence apparently is not important when Elizabeth Warren wants the Feds to lower interest rates, right? Not important. Not important for the Fed to be independent actors and to not be swayed by the pressure of a political party, right? Apparently, all that shit goes out the door when Elizabeth Warren, when Democrats want interest rates to be lowered. It's totally fine to pressure the Fed chair in, right? But when Republicans are in power, when Trump is in office, now all of a sudden, oh, you can't do that, right? Fed independence is so important. If you undermine the independence of the Fed, the economy is going to collapse, right? This is what they say. But if you really believe that, Elizabeth Warren, then why did you do the same thing? Why did you do it? If that's what you actually believe. Again, this is just another concrete example of what I'm telling you guys, how these people play the game. Rules for thee, not for me. Okay? Rules for thee, not for me. Every accusation is a confession, right? Every accusation is a confession. You don't think these people behind closed doors, or in Pocahontas' case, she was doing this publicly, but you don't think that these people behind closed doors were pressuring Jerome Powell to lower interest rates? That's probably why he ended up doing it before the election, right? That's probably why he did it right before the election, even though conditions weren't favorable for lowering interest rates right before the election. But Jerome Powell did a big 50 basis points drop anyways, right? Right before the election. And it just so happened at the time, the Federal Reserve Governor's Board was full of Biden appointees. He had more appointees, including Lisa Cook, right? Who's a dove, okay? She likes lower interest rates, okay, for obvious reasons. But at the time, it was full of these Biden appointees. Now all of a sudden, she's a hawk, right? She don't want to lower interest rates anymore, right? Even though conditions today are more favorable for interest rate cut than it was right before the election. You don't think politics has anything to do with that at all, right? Politics has nothing to do with it. And that's what I'm trying to tell you guys when these people come out here and talk about independence. The CDC should be independent of politics. The Fed should be independent of politics. It's like they don't really believe that. They're selling you a pipe dream. None of these institutions are quote unquote independent, right? All of them are influenced by politics. 100%. 100%. And if you really buying this nonsense from Democrats and mainstream liberal media talking about the attack on the independence of the Fed and the CDC and all these institutions that, again, supposed to be independent. Again, you're naive, right? You're too naive for politics, to be honest with you. Politics is not your thing. If you actually really believe that these institutions are politically independent, it's just not possible. It's not possible, okay? So let's go ahead and just stop pretending as if these institutions are 100% independent. They're not independent. This is why you didn't see a crazy market reaction, and not in the bond market, not in the stock market. You didn't see a crazy reaction when the woman was first fired in the first place, because nobody believes that the Fed is actually independent. Nobody believes that. Everybody knows that eventually what's going to happen, push come to shove, if Jerome Powell stays in, he's gone next year, and Trump is going to put in whoever he wants. So either way, Trump is going to get what he wants. It's about whether or not he's going to get it now or whether or not he's going to get it later. That's what it really comes down to. That's what it comes down to. So again, all of this, this is going to tank the economy. People are going to lose faith in the Fed, in our system. It's like, that's all nonsense, because nobody believes the premise of what these people are saying in the first place. Nobody believes that. But again, the point here is that this woman is in charge of our financial system, stress testing these banks, okay? And part of maintaining a system that is stable is rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse, because filling out your mortgage application correctly, if that's systemically fraudulent, right? If it's systemically fraudulent, then that is adding more risk to the system, and that risk is not being properly accounted for because, again, you have these fraudulent mortgages, right? So that's what people got to understand. So you can't have somebody who participates or allegedly participates in fraud, looking over fraud, right? Trying to root out fraud. It doesn't make sense. It's a conflict of interest, clearly.
So there are two elements here, the legal and ethical, right? And I was surprised to see a comment in The Economist, right, which has gone far left in recent years. And I want to read it for the audience, right? It says, given Ms. Cook is a financial regulator, it would be hard for her to stay in her post if the allegations were more substantiated. Even if she were not convicted, and regardless of motivations of those making the accusation. So here's a far-left financial magazine known for 100 years saying the better part of valor would be for her to step aside.
That is exactly right. It would be the best thing for her, honestly, but also the best thing for the country. We are 19 days away from the September Fed meeting. And just think about this, Charles. The Supreme Court of the United States may need to step in to block this woman from trying to show up to vote. This is not how you conduct business in the most powerful economy in the world. This is like a third world African republic with a pegged currency that the central bank is coming in to sue the president and the Supreme Court needs to get involved. This is precisely what Lisa Cook is trying to do. And let's be honest, this affects Fed credibility far more than the president of the United States removing her for a legitimate reason.
Facts. Facts. He's right. It does. It does affect Fed credibility, right? If you got somebody on the Fed board that credibly is being accused of mortgage fraud, not once, but twice, okay? Getting over the system, but yet we're supposed to trust that she's going to regulate the system when she can't even regulate herself. Yeah, I mean, that to me damages the Fed or Fed credibility more so than President Trump coming out here and saying that he wants lower interest rates. And again, it's just crazy to me because, you know, when I was in financial services, when I had my Series 7, 63, we were subject to all of these regulations, right? They were checking our backgrounds left and right, okay? Everything, fingerprinting, all of that, right? To make sure there are no conflicts of interest when you're working with clients. That's what they do in finance, okay? I had to go through it. And then we got this woman who's in charge of the system, right? She's allegedly committing fraud, and these people are trying to pretend like it's so wrong for this woman to be fired, when she hasn't even come up with any explanation for why she's innocent. She hasn't even denied the allegations. She hasn't even denied the allegations. She just said, well, it was a clerical error. I didn't do it on purpose. That's essentially what she said at this point. So again, she's either incompetent and dumb, right? And dumb enough to fill out a mortgage application incorrectly, right? To fill out a very, very, very important part, which is whether or not this is a primary or secondary or investment home, right? She's too dumb to correctly fill out a mortgage application, that or she's purposely cheating the system. Either way, both should be fireable offenses. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.